Palantir.
Hey, this is not a test. This is rock and roll. Time to rock it from the Delta to the DMZ. Is that me or does that sound like an Elvis Presley movie? Viva Da Nang. Oh, viva.
All right, welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we are going to be talking about the network effects of AI. And so, like, what do I mean by that? Well, you know how if you create a social network and no one uses it, it's not super valuable. But if a lot of people start using it, it becomes way more valuable, right? And actually, the more people that use it, the more valuable it tends to get. This is the typical network effects that you see for companies like Meta or companies like Google and all these others. But a lot of people are overlooking like the fact that AI is bringing its own set of network effects, and we're going to talk about those in four separate contexts, right? So we're going to start with Google, and one of the interesting things about how AI is ramping the value of Google is how AI can use Google to search, right? So let's imagine Google has a search API, right? And it's the best in the world. If AI can use that search API, and it is the best in the world at providing the most contextually relevant, curated answers with all of the right context and can provide all of the correct linking back into to retrieve more information about a subject, that search engine's going to win. That search is one of the most valuable things that we as developers have to do to enable good answer quality and to also be able to get a richer context for the model when solving certain problems. So AI in the context of search engines is creating this enormous network effect where if you have the best search engine, you might have some of the best agents in certain parts of the stack, right? And that same thing is happening over here in enterprise, right? So what's interesting, enterprise data is largely untapped. About 80% of an organization's data is unstructured, and it has largely just sat around doing nothing for years now. What Palantir is enabling is the processing of all of that unstructured data using all of the world's best models, right? And they're all very good at certain things. You can apply KLM patterns to this using, the just the right model for just the right task, what you're trying to achieve in Foundry. But the fact we can use AI to process all of that unstructured data and bring it into Foundry's ontology is making all of the things that were already in Foundry like 10 times more valuable, right? So like the data processing pipelines, the fact they're connected to an ontology, the fact the ontology has all these pre-built application building tools that sit right on top of it, that is infinitely more valuable now that we can tap into all of this unstructured data that is sitting there in enterprises around the world and is insanely valuable. Like I'm doing this on a daily basis right now. Things like pricing and contracting and cost recovery and, automating workflows and figuring out solutions to like, how do you remediate an insurance claim? This is all made possible because we can use AI to process data like never before, right? And Foundry is the premier platform for that. And AI is making that platform 10 times more valuable. And that's why Palantir has experienced so much growth as soon as AI hit the market. Palantir was growing, yes, but its growth rate was declining until AIP. And that's because that platform all of a sudden became infinitely more valuable because now AI can take advantage of all that enterprise data, but you have to have a platform like Palantir in order to do it, right? So AI is bringing its own set of network effects for processing unstructured data in the enterprise. And Palantir is largely benefiting from that. This is interesting. So like, why is what additional value does AI bring to X? Well, it's kind of interesting because X is like a sentiment meter on the world, right? And what's interesting is that it has a hugely like robust set of APIs that you can tap into to use all of this data, but it's massive, right? We're talking like enormous scales. And also you need something like an LLM to be able to understand the language that's being discussed on X to spit out things like sentiment analysis. But X is infinitely more valuable if you can do that, right? If you have a model like Grok that can natively understand what people are saying, because, the way we communicate on Twitter can be a little challenging even for a human at times. I think that the fact that you can now use a large language model to tap into and sort of spit out a plausible explanation of how people are feeling or what they're talking about, et cetera, that makes that data immensely more valuable and way more actionable in a lot of cases. And to be able to process it as inputs to a system is also really valuable, right? So X can be like a funnel into everything. Imagine X as a platform. If you have a model that natively understands how people talk and communicate, it becomes easier for that to be the input to the world's API economy as well, right? So if voice is going to be the new input into the world's API economy, you have X, which is like sentiment and almost like communication, right? It's how people talk and communicate online. That's super, super valuable for the company. And I think that their models are already showing capability. Like for right now, we're processing Slack messages in our Foundry stack. And what's interesting about that problem is like the way we talk on Slack throws a lot of models out. There's emojis everywhere. It's like really short. And Grok actually does a really good job, a much better job of processing that data than other models. So I think X is going to experience a lot of network effects by unlocking not only the sentiment of the world, but you can use it as a gateway into the API economy. And I think that's going to be super valuable. And then lastly, we're going to talk a little bit about NASDAQ, right? So like we all know NASDAQ has some great APIs, and you can, I think they have one that is a near real-time API that professional traders use and brokerages. But what's interesting about this is you could think of this as the gateway into the world's trading, right? And we kind of also think of this. So what's interesting here is like, okay, those near real-time APIs, they've been around a long time. There's algorithmic trading that goes on all of the time. We have a lot of automation that already does these things. What's interesting about it is the vast amount of trend analysis that can be done here, and anomaly detection and arbitrage. I actually think that in some cases, if you combine some of these other sources, you can get better signals than we do today, especially if you think about like a platform like Palantir, bringing all that data in and processing it. There are questions that I want to be able to ask that are around the idea of like, what is the effect of this tariff going to do to, specific companies that work together and that form a supply chain and stuff like that. And the NASDAQ that data is going to end up being really, really, really valuable to figure out how companies move together and finding like different anomalies and there might be correlations where you sort of want to incorporate that data into these questions you're trying to build around a network or graph. And again, that the reason it's going to be more valuable than it is today is because there are more different types of questions we can now answer that aren't just find me a divergence in two correlated stocks. It's like, oh, I want to know how these companies are going to, if this tariff goes into effect, how impacted are all, like, what is the network of companies that are impacted, and what are their prices likely to go to? How much money are they going to predicted to lose, and then what as a result of that should I be investing in, right? And I think hedge funds have done this really well in the past. But I think AI is going to democratize a lot of this. And so these rich data sources that we need become way more valuable because now maybe you don't need to be a hedge fund to do these kind of things, right? Maybe you can be a smart to do these things. Maybe you can be a group of guys that are forming a startup and you're doing these things. So I think that AI generates network effects because in these cases, because it's making the underlying asset more valuable because of the new things we can now do as a result of having AI. Right. And so I think this is a super important point, and especially in the Palantir case, like when I think about the things we're able to do now in AIP and the like AIP comes with its own integrations for using LLMs in your software. Right. And one of them is like in Pipeline Builder, you can ask a model to build transforms for you. So you say, hey, will you deduplicate this thing? Will you make a transform to do the following? And it'll the model will actually spit that out for you. Okay, that's great. But then you can also use the LLM to do data extraction and data transformation. So like in a lot of cases, we are using the LLM to pull data out of documents, pull data out of communications. We generate follow-up task lists from our emails and our Slack communications. We have models schedule meetings as a result of this. And so just having like an LLM in a data transformation pipeline is absolutely insane. And the fact that we're able to now like unlock all this data is pretty incredible. So like, this, I think a lot of people are just overlooking this. And if you're thinking about like, where do I put my bets in AI? And I hate the term that data is the new oil. I don't really think of it that way. I think it's like, what are the companies that are going to figure out the interesting things to do with AI that make things way more valuable than they used to be, is the way to really think about this. And you can think about that in terms of like a company. For example, if I can form a company with 10 people that used to do the work of 1,000 people, but because we're leveraging AI at the core, I can eliminate a lot of the needless, work around managing communications or managing paperwork and project management and all this other type of stuff. That company is going to be insanely more effective and valuable. And so like there's a massive network effect that gets generated as AI becomes an integral part of the user base and the ecosystem, right? It's like you have to think of it now. There's this other user out here that's an artificial user, and it's bringing its own set of network effects and value creation. And when we think about like the amount of value that can be generated by just rethinking how you structure a company, rethinking how you would build a solution entirely with AI at the core, how much value is amplified as a result of that. And you could bring that to anything. Like I think you could actually bring AI into any business that currently exists today. And think about like if we were to rebuild it and we would put AI at the center, what would that business look like, right? And I think this is actually going to lead to something really interesting, which is inorganic growth, right? And so like in the past, most of the time tech companies, they would grow organically, meaning like more users would use their system. They use product-led growth. They didn't do a lot of advertising. Like they basically were relying on the strength of their technology to drive adoption and drive value creation for their customers. What about inorganic growth? So if you think about these companies that are largely benefiting from AI, or you think about, in the case of Palantir, how much more valuable it is now that we have AI. What about the, person that makes tortilla chips down the road, or like the person that makes widgets, right? Like the factory over here. What about some of these businesses that are probably not great on paper that maybe private equity owns, right? And you go through a portfolio of these companies and, in a lot of cases, PE guts these things and they take costs out of the business. But imagine just rebuilding the freaking thing. Like, what if you went out and bought these companies, right? What if you were a company that like mastered technology? You knew how to use AI effectively. You had it embedded in your business running all your operations. What if you went out then and just bought other companies? Think of the network effects AI is bringing in those cases, right? And you actually just transform those companies by properly implementing AI and getting those companies to run as AI first principle, and you bring the cost just tremendously down, right? Then you sell those companies, or you keep them as an asset in your portfolio. I think that's also something that's going to start happening. We're start seeing this like pattern of inorganic growth where people who are really good at AI, maybe it's Palantir, maybe it's Google, maybe it's someone else who've learned to master this stuff, go out and they start buying up companies that they can transform. And if you can control them, if you can get the people out of the way who are the detractors, and you can restructure the company, gut all the old systems, get rid of the ERP, get rid of the CRM, get rid of everything, replace it with AI forward software that actually works. AI being a major user base now in the system, within the company as well, that's going to generate insane network effects. And the more things that AI can tap into, the more valuable they become, because now you're not moving at the speed of, say, a human being bottlenecking a process. Your business can now run at the speed of sort of electrons, right? And like the speed of AI and the speed of the data stream. That's going to be insanely valuable. I mean, we are going to, if we could do this at scale, in my opinion, really drive GDP growth as a result of that. But it's really interesting when you start thinking about like, hey, how does AI change the equation for existing software companies? And this is something I'm going to go out and be doing a lot of research on, and looking at the companies whose assets now are way more valuable if AI is applied correctly, and thinking of these as almost like arbitrage opportunities for inorganic growth, right? So like, where can I put together, the right people in my network who may be able to structure a deal to go out and purchase some of these companies, right? I think this is something that if you're an entrepreneur out there, if you're a person who is thinking big about AI, this is the thing you need to start thinking about. Which companies are way more valuable as a result of AI now being an ecosystem player? And how can we build like this new model of inorganic growth in the software world, in the technology world, that goes out, purchases these companies, retrofits them to be a company in the modern era of AI, and make them like 100 times more valuable than they used to be, right? So this is something to think about. It's a short video today, but I've been thinking about this all week. I wanted to share my thoughts with all of you. I think it's a great idea if you start like looking into this and looking at publicly traded companies that could be a lot more valuable with AI than they are without it. It could be something, not investment advice, but like could be something that's just an interesting research out there and share it, and definitely share it with me. Like if you're looking at companies and you have some ideas around how inorganic growth strategies like this could be implemented, or which companies are like, hey, look, this asset they have is now like way more valuable as a result of AI, be interesting to hear from you. All right, and that is it. Thank you and enjoy your weekend.